We're going into great power, like World War I, great power politics. I mean, there's a level of brutality and barbarity that I think has reared its head and does periodically in history. And it usually is a prelude to a major global conflagration. I have no vocabulary to describe this. For my whole life of watching politics, I cannot put this into any context. And so there's a level of paralysis that has been induced as a result of this. It's like shock and awe. We're in a shock and awe situation in history. And a lot of people just do not know how to react to it. So what do? They just stay despondent and silent.
This episode of the Free Cities podcast is brought to you by Veritas Village. Now, Veritas Village is an off-grid, self-sufficient place for people who are interested in living a normal, freedom-oriented life. You can reduce your reliance on corporations or government systems in your very own energy self-sufficient luxury home with its own water supply, located in a perfect climate to grow your own food. Communities use Bitcoin, and you can also buy your property with Bitcoin as well. www.ecovillages.life/free cities for more info. Please don't forget to mention the Free Cities podcast, and in the meantime, enjoy the conversation. Now, I better set the scene here, and we've started, by the way.
Okay.
We met in a taxi. And we talked for about 3 hours right off the bat, which is always a good thing because you kind of like, you normally get a lot done in that first 3 hours.
Yeah, right. Put the world to rights as best you can.
Yeah, right. And we kind of did. But what was kind of surprising to me was that I thought I was kind of in the alternative scene in the UK. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like, I mean people thinking differently, people who, what's the word for people who think outside the box?
Yeah, open-minded, alternative thinkers.
There's a word.
Unconventional.
Heterodox.
Right. Yes, that's a
I
good word.
thought I was in the heterodox community, which I am.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, there's a whole part of it that I have no connection to at all. And I mean, it's not even the kind of crazy conspiracy theory people at all. I'm talking about the part that you seem to frequent a little bit. And that is, in the UK at least, a publication or a media company called the UK Column. And that was a real eye-opener for me because I haven't done a deep dive, but speaking to you and looking at what they're doing, et cetera, you seem to be kind of in the market of intelligently reporting on things that the mainstream media won't talk about. Is that a fair...
That's a pretty good assessment.
Okay, right. Yeah. Obviously, there's other assessments of you. I'm going to read one of them out, of course.
Oh, definitely.
You are a conspiracy theory orientated online media outlet. This is Hope Not Hate.
Yep.
You're probably far right if I get to it.
Yep.
You had a considerable boost during the COVID-19 pandemic and remains a significant voice in the UK conspiracy theorist media. I mean, what is that UK conspiracy? This is Hope Not Hate. They're one of those things that basically class everything except themselves as far right or conspiracy theories, basically.
Yeah, the standard fare. That's pretty big.
But yeah. How did I end up missing UK Column? Because how did I miss that?
I think probably the community that you're amongst and that you're, following, and some people it just pass. They're not seeing it for whatever reason. We don't fall into the Alex Jones, end of the spectrum. So I would say the best way to describe UK Column is I've been working with them since 2012. First as a writer in their newspaper, and they used to have a print publication at a national circulation. Much like the light newspaper, you've probably seen that around, but UK Column is more grounded, more into deep politics. But and then they went full video in 2013, 2014, started going full video, and on, I would say Middle England. So, typical, retired or professional military, active duty, ex-police officers, people in the civil servants, people who do, the backbone of the country, basically. That's the audience.
That's the interesting part, though, because I didn't know they were into. I thought they all loved the BBC and sitting there and having news spoon fed to them.
Yeah.
So how did I get that wrong then? I mean, how did I get that wrong?
I think we had a sizable audience before COVID, but I would say it 10x'd during COVID, because the real conspiracy during COVID was so insidious, and the groupthink was being enforced at such a extreme level, and there was so much government money that was spent, to get the mainstream media basically to run on all the leads, as well as the print media, all ran with the same leads. And we found out later that was government money being pumped into that outpaced anything in advertising. And the government, was paying above rack rate for center spreads, for front page inserts, all that. So, they were really subsidizing the mainstream media. So the mainstream media is not going to go against the government, when, just like if the pharmaceutical company was buying up all the ads right across Murdoch's press and the Mail and the Daily Express, which the Daily Express is basically a pharmaceutical advertising outlet for statins and whatever they're pushing on their front page. Miracle drug for Alzheimer's, cure for dementia. But the government becomes the number one client. And I think enough people in Britain realized something was very, very wrong with this picture, and instinctively knew that they were being had on a very, very deep and profound level, and that the BBC was absolutely skull-plugging the population, and there was gaslighting going on a level that had never been seen before in modern human history. It was really a major human event. Never before in the history of the human race has there been a global, unified response to anything, and that penetrated so deeply into the personal lives of people, deeply into the person, restriction of freedom on a level that you couldn't even comprehend, and it was ubiquitous across the globe. And so people were then looking for an outlet, because a lot of people come up to us years later and say, I was going insane. I was going crazy. And they said, and you guys were, you kept this sane, because we came out kind of fighting against the narrative from the beginning. And we knew what we were looking at, because we had already built up to that point years before. So every single scandal or crisis that we covered in the previous years was practice. So you're training for the next battle. By the time we got to COVID, we were already ready to go. And so we pulled out, as much as, and it took a lot out of people. It took a lot out of me personally. A lot of us were isolated from our families because airspace was closed. We couldn't travel because we didn't have vaccine cards and things like that. And so, you're not eating particularly well as well. So, your health is going downhill. I know you didn't have to deal with as much of that, because you had managed to escape the colony, as the prison, as it were.
Well, it wasn't that difficult, actually. I think the what I noticed about that whole period, or one of my big sort of takeaways, apart from the fact, like you, I was almost in awe watching this thing unfold, because it was so monumental, was that there was a lot of smoke and mirrors. And that was what was stopping most people doing things, because the smoke and mirrors said you can't travel, and you could. We booked flights to Spain, and we went to Spain. Then we booked flights to Mexico, and we went there. And it was actually very cheap to do it at that time. And in fact, I've told this story before, but I was driving one Christmas when I was supposedly shouldn't be, to go and collect someone. I won't give too much away, but I was going to collect someone who I thought was having a bad time, that really needed to be around people, let's say. And I don't know whether the bridge over the Bristol Channel,
the Severn.
Yeah. When you come, back then, obviously there was no cars on the roads and everything. It was late at night, but they had all these flashing signs up that they normally put, like roadworks or whatever. But it's like LED panels that they can write things on, and they were all like, "Go back," and border crossing, blah blah blah. And I remember driving down there. It was a bit like that film, was it 28 Days Later? I was driving down the middle of this sort of like 6-lane bridge thinking, is there going to be like is it going to be like barbed wire at the border between Wales and England or something? Obviously, I got there was nothing. I carried on. I got all the way to where I was going, which was right down the end of the M4. And so and it was literally smoke and mirrors. Like the way that I was being controlled was all in my mind, and that I've learned that lesson. That's the kind of like one of the first things I look for now, actually, when anything big happens. It's like, what's actually true? What actually am I being said? And how do I act accordingly?
I read the mainstream media a lot, and people say, "Why do you waste time? Why do you quote the BBC? Why, because they're lying to us. Everything they say is a lie." You hear this all the time. But part of our job in the so-called independent or alternative media, I have to read the mainstream media because I need to know what the state or the government or the establishment want me to think and want the public to think. Because they're sending those signals out all the time. How you need to think about what has just happened, that major event that you just mentioned, whatever it is, you're always going to be, as a member of the public, as George Orwell tried to teach us after all his years as a propagandist with the BBC during the war. He was trying to warn us about this system, this machine that's being constructed for the purposes of manipulating public perception. And so, so the first thing you would do when you look at the BBC is, how do they want me to think? Which side do they want me to be on? Do they want me to fear, to hate, to be reviled, to be disgusted, to be, in a fit of righteous indignation over whatever it is? And so by doing that, we can gauge the propaganda level, and then we know how serious of a propaganda campaign is. And of course, there was no question with the pandemic, the so-called pandemic, that this was all they pulled out all the stops for this. Yeah. It was a full spectrum campaign, and maximum public buy-in, maximum compliance. So,
what I was going to say as well, to set the scene, because the fact that I've never heard of UK Column made me think that it's probably just a little website or something, but it's not either. It's got a lot of people that watch it and subscribe to it and watch broadcasts. You have a TV studio and everything. And you're like the geopolitics guy, right? Is that fair?
I'm international politics. Yeah.
Right, but also you're like what? I mean, from talking to you over the last few days, you're what I'd call a hack, a proper travels around, goes to wars, right with a notepad. Check. Are you that guy?
I've done a bit of that. Yeah, I've done a bit of that. But I most of what I do now is kind of in front of a camera. But at any opportunity I have to go, it's worth its weight in gold for the rest of your life, because you can draw off your personal experiences, and it helps to color your analysis, and it anchors it in some reality. So you at least have some, you can marry a real situation with what your theoretical and analytical assessment is. And I just don't want to be that desktop journalist my whole life. And so if I have a chance, I'll go. And I'm very used to inserting myself into countries or situations, and I know who to work with, and local cameramen and local guide, translators, armed guards in some cases, and working with other journalists. We all help each other out. You probably know this in your, this community. Everyone's always helping each other. It's the same in media. You rely on favors from all sorts of journalists, people who work for, the local TV station in a country like, let's say I would go to Malaysia. So immediately you want to hook up with the local Malaysian TV station, see if there's anybody that's interested in talking to you. Then they, help you with whatever you're looking for, and in some cases will roll out the red carpet because you're coming from United States or Britain or Europe or something. And my history with journalism is very much mainstream journalism, 100%. But I do understand that camaraderie, for sure. And this is where I think sometimes I feel a little bit unsure about alternative media outlets. And rightly or wrongly, that's because I came from very bona fide mainstream media outlets. And
there's a way of doing things. Now, I'm not sitting here saying they did it correctly, but there was a certain amount of gravitas to being a journalist. And what you sometimes find in the alternative space is people who just report on things. And actually, I find that a lot, especially in these kind of communities. People just say kind of blanket statements, and when you drill down on them, you don't get anything. You just don't get anything at all. There's nothing.
It's derivative. It's derivative of something someone else said, and
exactly.
And that person's talking about someone else's. So you don't. It's virtual.
Yeah, but that's what I found interesting about talking to you. Is you seem to come from that old school hack version of journalism.
Well, I tried because I always loved all my favorite journalists from The Independent, Robert Fisk, Middle East correspondent.
Right, yeah.
These are the people that I always looked up to over the years, 90s, in the 2000s. So
he got caught reporting a little bit not correctly in the Middle East, you know.
Well, yes and no, but he's also,
he's very knowledgeable.
He's also won awards. So I mean, no one's perfect about all the reporting. But the point is, and he's not. Patrick Coburn is another one. That's ex-independent.
I don't know. I didn't work with him.
But I said I have to go where they are, basically. And so that brought me to Lebanon, and then that made me fluent in the Arabic world enough to go to Syria and Iraq and other countries with confidence and a knowledge of the culture, a knowledge of how to behave, how to speak, how to engage with people, the attitude to have that you're not going to annoy everybody, kind of thing. Because I've traveled in press pools with mainstream BBC, AP, some of the big titles, and it's shocking how some people they're very, let's say, entitled is a good word, and the things they demand of local people, and also people with a lot of resources, but and also creating propaganda. I've witnessed it firsthand. I've reported two different, you see two different versions. We're all there, and I'm reading their version, and it's completely, and that at that point there was more going on than meets the eye. Obviously, you're in there with governments, and you think you're with the mainstream press, but you're also with intelligence agencies sometimes, at least tangentially, and you're also with somebody who's really pushing a British or a NATO or a French or a U.S. government line. And that's their job. They have to deliver that point. That's why they were sent in the first place.
And actually, I think what I've watched, because I do watch the news, not as deeply as you, obviously, but what you notice now is when AP or Reuters put something out, it goes everywhere. And that's much worse than it was when I was a journalist. When I was a journalist, there were 10 newspapers there sometimes, and 5 agencies.
Yes.
Now, I know, for example, when I was at the Independent, I got to become the chief photographer of the Sunday paper in the end, and we had at the highest point we had almost sort of 6 to 10 jobbing photographers per day working, and that's the Independent. They were skint. Yeah. They had a small, and now obviously they have none. They have no staff photographers, no contract photographers, and most of their news, when you look at it, is coming off the wires.
All of it is, yeah, right, almost all of it, yeah.
Right. So the wires are now the bona fide news sources. People can quote them directly and just say, right, this is it. And then as a result, when the narrative goes out now, boom, it seems to go out even harder than before.
Absolutely. There's no plurality within the mainstream media coverage. But having said that, I have a respect for some Reuters reporters who do excellent work on a certain range of subjects that I will go to them, and their words are just as good as gold, and it usually stacks up with the research. Having said that, on anything that's ultra sensitive, different story. There's definitely a perception, a line of perception, an agreed line of perception.
Why I hope not hate calling you, not that we trust them at all, but why are they calling you a conspiracy theory channel?
Because organizations like that, like Center for Countering Digital Hate, NGOs like Hope Not Hate, and they feel like it is their job, and in fact they do play a role for the establishment, to bracket any voices that and label them as extremist. Anything outside of the orthodoxy or the what I call, this is the best term I've ever heard, and it's from somebody who worked in corporate marketing at the highest levels of the UK consumer corporate marketing. He said it's about consensus reality. They're selling consensus reality, and then the back end of that would be Noam Chomsky's famous book called Manufacturing Consent. Manufacturing consent. So, but consensus reality is what they're after, and the public, what they call the plebs, the general public, the sheeple, as the truth community call it, or what we call CR merchants, consensus reality merchants. And so, if you're not in the consensus reality, and that's kind of where your mainstream Guardian readers are, that's where your Times readers are, and anything outside of that is extremism, conspiracy theories, whatever. I mean, think of the epithet. They have a whole sort of system for, smearing and just trying to discredit anybody. And what we're doing is really challenging the consensus reality, because this is the job of the media. This is why they issue D-notice. You know what a D-notice is, right?
I don't actually. What was that?
D-notice is the government issues a series of D-notices. These are things that all the papers cannot talk about. And you're obligated to call up and get the latest D-notice from the organization that issues those. These are things that might violate, or they're too sensitive for national security reasons, or stories that are breaking, but no British media can report on them.
Do you follow those?
No, we don't engage with the D-notices. So, but I think there's...
Does that get you into trouble then?
In some cases, it absolutely does. I think when you're below a certain level of audience and readership, it's not as much of a concern. But if you are, rising above that, I'll give you an example. Is in America is Candace Owens. Candace Owens is swimming in international politics now.
Absolutely.
And so if she was in Britain, and she is part British, and she's married to a British gentleman and has family, and her kids are half British, but she's with France. It's so sensitive with the Trump administration and Macron and Trump's relationship. It became a problem, is her reporting on Macron's personal life and that story. And so if that was in Britain, there would be a D-notice. If this was about, let's say, the British Prime Minister, there would definitely be a D-notice issued across the mainstream media. So you will not give any more fuel to this story. It's too sensitive. It's got a national security letter on it.
What's the national security about Macron's wife's testicles?
The stability of the French state.
It's a phenomenal story.
I know.
So, do you know much about that story? Have you?
Absolutely followed it. Yeah.
And so, is it true?
Well, let's just put it this way. Candace is really working off of work that's already been done by French independent researchers and journalists. And I've also cross-referenced with my French media cohort, people that I follow and know, and we talk about issues that deal with France or NATO. And they said, absolutely, this is credible research. And it's been around for a while, and it has been absolutely blackballed in the French mainstream press. And a lot of people are afraid to report on it. So I think she's into a story that there's a lot there. Exactly how deep it goes, and if it's extreme as she is saying it is, obviously it has profound implications, because it's really insane. It's really insane that someone would be allowed to rise up to the level of a head of state of a nuclear armed country in the UN Security Council level. Means that they're heavily compromised, obviously. But if you look at it, the Jeffrey Epstein story, half of it is French. Half of the Jean-Luc Brunel side, the Ghislaine Maxwell was decamped in Paris. There's so much there. So it's not just a U.S. story; it's a French and U.S. and British story.
It's interesting because I when I heard about it, I mean, for the uninitiated, the story is basically that Macron's wife is actually a man, or formerly a man,
or her father,
or whatever. Oh gosh,
I mean his father.
But
he's married to his dad.
What's undeniable is that his wife, or she did actually meet him when he was quite young.
Yeah.
And he his teacher. Or,
the claim is that when he was 15.
I don't think it's even a claim, though, is it? This is a like.
What I think what Candace is referring to is the claim is 15 or 16. In actuality, it was younger.
Oh, okay.
14, maybe even 13. Who knows? But the point is, it might even be worse than what is the conspiracy. So.
And another huge red flag on that story for me was because I subscribed to Candace Owens' podcast and to find out what she's saying about it. And obviously I trust that she's not lying about this, but she said that either Trump or Trump's team, may even have been Trump, I think, himself, called her directly and told her to stand down a little bit.
Back off.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's true, right?
It's true, yeah.
I mean, that in itself is insane. I mean, we're talking about a story so outlandish. This is, I think we discussed this in the car. It's like when I remember when Alex Jones was getting deplatformed, I was thinking to myself, why are they bothering to deplatform Alex Jones? Because when you listen to him, if you're your average BBC watching person, you look at Alex Jones and go, oh my God, that guy is just talking a load of nonsense. But the fact that they went so hard on him to deplatform him makes you wonder. Shit, there must be a reason for this. Why would they act so seriously? And the same goes for this thing with Macron. Why bother trying to snub this so hard? I would have thought it would be so easy. Most people, when they hear that story, will go, Are you having a laugh?
Yeah.
Of course he's not.
Well, the implication, if you follow that line, would be that there's the establishment or the powers that be or whatever are trying to cover something up by going in so hard. I mean, they did send a French lawyer to sue Candace, and then Candace counterpunched back and exposed the lawyers being basically defending pedos and things like that. As the establishment's go-to defense guy to do all the dirty jobs for the elite, and then the case was dropped. For Alex, it was the Sandy Hook story, and the implication being that there was a cover up there, and Alex was not the first, nor was he the only one who had challenged that story publicly at the time, but he obviously was the biggest. So the establishment wanted to make an example out of him, and not just go after him, but destroy his entire media footprint. And he survived, and he's still in the air, which is an incredible thing in itself. That speaks to his resilience as a force of nature in media. Alex is amazing in that respect.
Absolutely, you've got to at least respect him for that, for sure. What I'm surprised at, and this is, I obviously underestimate the foresight of the powers that be. I sometimes think they're a bit incompetent. But I would never have touched Alex Jones if I was them, because I'd think, what's the point? You're just drawing attention to it. And then, but I think there's something in it. I think he's causing problems. Candace Owens is actually causing problems, or someone like Tommy Robinson in the UK, who once, same kind of thing. Like a couple of years ago, I'd have said, I don't know why you're focusing so much on Tommy Robinson. He's a minority interest, but now, because of all that interest, he's got Elon Musk tweeting him, or at one point, I think it's 1.2 million followers on Twitter. And
being an opposition figure is obviously going to turbocharge your platform, as it were. For Alex. The establishment was going after Donald Trump at the time, like from 2015 until, I would say, right up until the last election cycle was done in 2024. And Alex is one of, I think, maybe 5 or 6 media figures who helped to propel Trump into office in 2016, and by a slim margin. So you think all of those big media moguls, like Alex Jones, Michael Savage, the radio host, these people, by backing Trump, they gave the edge to Donald Trump in the polls over Hillary Clinton. And so they're thinking that makes them consequential in the political economy, not just, loudmouth blowhards, but they actually are pushing results in the ballot box. And then that becomes a real threat.
Well, and I think we saw that in the last election. I mean, Rogan is a friend of Alex Jones, a very old friend. Mm-hmm. Rogan was it was a huge part of Trump's image sort of being raised this time round.
Yep.
I think you're right. I think this is what differentiates MPs now. That you've got the ones that can sit on a podcast and talk, and the ones that can't.
Yeah.
And that's basically the two types of people we get. Keir Starmer can't sit on a podcast in the UK. He can't do that. He's ideologically driven. So he has to remember the whole ideology and then spit it out. Someone like Rupert, what's Rupert?
Rupert Lowe.
Rupert Lowe, different. He can sit. He's got some understanding, some ideas. So you can ask him any question and he'll be able to sort of like talk about that thing. Trump's the same, like so is Trump's vice.
JD Vance.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely more. They've pivoted more into the new media format and the long form interviews. So they're not afraid. I mean, Trump's not afraid to do impromptu Q&A for 3. I've seen him do 2 hours in the White House, the large room, where he ended up doing his press conferences. Not that little closet that they have used for years, but the large room. So he's not afraid to do that. I mean, that served Trump very well. Now he's getting more cagey, I think, because the policies are it's a lot more. He's having a lot more trouble now, I think, sustaining the hype. The wave of hype is now calmed down after inauguration, and he's faced with all sorts of dilemmas on the economic front, foreign policy front, and he has inherited a lot of disasters from the previous administration. But then he's also declared economic warfare on like half the planet with tariffs and sanctions and things like that, which is not doing him any favors. And he's looking for wins that he can parlay into election results at home in the upcoming midterms, because of course, if the Republicans can't keep the House in the midterms, then the MAGA agenda is going to stall, and you're going to get impeachments again, like repeat of the last time. So I mean, they're trying to stave off that sort of result. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's a very funny time right now.
Something you mentioned a little while ago is the truth community. That's a new. I mean, I know what it is. I don't know much about it. I don't spend much time in it. It seems to me, my surface level understanding of the truth community is there's a lot of bullshit in there as well. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
I think more than ever. There's more. It's ironic because, with all due respect to everybody and their opinions and the kaleidoscope of opinions and beliefs, there are a lot of people in the alternative community will say we've been lied to about everything, and the mainstream media, it's all lies and this and that. And I say, look, it's not all. Like, I cite mainstream media sources for certain things. I mean, Joe Rogan's not sending people to report on Supreme Court cases and do the diligent work of court reporting. And so Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman and they're not the replacement for the mainstream media. They can't do what Reuters do, even if we don't like necessarily what everything the mainstream's doing. They do perform a public service on a lot of levels. They just happen to be really poor on anything related to foreign policy, and get up to that level of manipulation when you have intelligence services involved and you have billions and trillions of dollars of energy and continental drifts geopolitically, then it's obviously a different game. It's way above our pay grade, all of us. But the point is, the alternative media, the independent media, is also a big source of lies and disinformation. They are flooding the zone with equally amount of balderdash, basically. And I think a lot of people are confused as a result, and a lot of people are almost paralytic and despondent. And that brings us back to our original point. Why do people watch the UK column? Because it's that halfway house where they can go and get some grounding on a lot of issues and get at least some stability on the conversation. We're not with the mainstream, obviously, but then we're not too far on the fringe, and we're doing it in a news type format where it's comfortable for people to sit, and then they can think, and then we'll present facts, and we'll present all of the links to everything that we show on the screen after the program. So if you have any questions, so nothing is unsourced. Nothing is unsourced on our program. So I think a lot of people appreciate that, and Middle England and professionals appreciate that because they want to bring people to watch. So they want to be confident that they're bringing someone over to something that's not a fly-by-night operation, that's not half-baked. And so, yes, there's real journalism happening there. There is a political slant, an ideological slant on certain issues. I would say very much center-right on a lot of issues, but then again, very liberal on others. So, but overall, I would think pretty centrist generally in the traditional sense. You know, what centrist was 20, 30 years ago, that's kind of like where we are. Maybe not by centrist 2025 mainstream standards. That's different.
Yeah. I know what you mean, though, about the everything's wrong brigade. And I do find myself falling into that. Because these days, you could tell me, I mean, you could point out anything to me, as ludicrous as you like, that went against the mainstream narrative. And I would entertain it. You know, I would, like 5-10 years ago, if you said to me the earth was flat, I'd just laugh at you. And now if you said, look, the earth's flat, I would say, right, show me the evidence. You know, I'm actually doing that.
Yeah,
I'm not convinced.
So you're engaged in the debate, in the dialogue. Yeah.
But I want to. I do want to engage in debate. I think that's the way that, certainly in talk shows like this, that's how you should. If you came on and said the world's flat, I'm all ears. Yeah. I'd say, well, convince me then.
I wouldn't say, actually.
Right.
But just to be clear on the record, I wouldn't say that. So just to be clear. But I'm one of those guys. I'm one of those heliocentric globe earthers. I'm an extremist. But again, and I have to caveat this, some of my best friends, really, some of them are, what you might call flat earthers. And, we just don't talk about it,
It's a strange thought.
But we agree on a whole bunch of other stuff.
But what's going on in my brain, right, that something so ludicrous, I mean, a lot of ludicrous things have somehow proven to be true of late. And that is I think flat Earth's the big daddy out of all of them. It really is. It's ridiculous when you think about it. But I'm ready to hear. When I listen to, it's almost like I want it to be true. When I look at the data, I'm trying to steel man it, because if it was true, that would be amazing.
Well, the reason I think it's been so successful and grown as a kind of point of interest is because it's hard to steel man some of the arguments or the opposition arguments to some of the way that they're presenting their arguments, but it's really a case of how it's being presented and how the discussion's being framed and curated. Obviously, I could come with equally steel-manned approach from the other side, and it will be very hard for them to debunk. So instead of debunking what I'm showing, they'll just come up with their own and say, yes, but you need to refute this. So there's no real scientific debate going on. Having said that, you and I might think it's implausible, it's ridiculous, but other people don't. And so what I'm interested in is why they don't. How convincing is the argument? What are the and I'm very interested to see what the presentation is to a point. But I can't spend that much time on it, because if it takes up too much bandwidth, engaging in that argument, it's taking time away from things that, like, let's say, clear and present dangers to society and our country and the world, which are, the threat of thermonuclear war, of World War III breaking out in the Middle East or in Ukraine. And are we going to be dragged into that as a society like we were during COVID, or like we were during the war on terror in 9/11 or the Iraq War? That's where I'm putting all of my priority, my time, and my energy, and my worry for humankind is there. And so, and not on, what type of world we're living in, because I think the bottom line is this. I always say to them, look, if it was decided, or you could prove tomorrow that you're right, and that, it's a giant pizza crust, how is that going to change your life in a material way, your day-to-day life tomorrow? And the answer is not very much. You still have to pay your council tax. The bailiffs are still going to come and demand your whatever rent and your electric and you still have to pay the phone bill and do your chores and, look after your kids and all that stuff. So it doesn't change anything. Anyway, it does take up a bigger part of the bandwidth of a lot of the content, though. And I don't know what to think about that, quite frankly.
Let's not give it too much bandwidth. Yeah. Let's give something bandwidth, which I was interested to talk to you about. This when we first met. I gave you my very simplified version of the Ukraine situation, which was something along the lines of NATO are edging a little bit too close to Russia, so Russia had to show some kind of tour de force, and it ended up in this scenario, and which was my best guess at what was going on. And I think that's even a conspiracy, but you went a lot deeper and said a lot of other things. Would you mind summing it up in a little bit? I found it very interesting.
Well, what you just said is true. It is true. That's a major factor. That's two major powers colliding, being NATO and the Russian Federation, two major world powers, two nuclear powers, NATO being a confab, obviously, an alliance, a quote, defensive alliance that's expanding at a rapid rate surrounding its main adversary, Russia. So not very defensive, I would say, not from a Russian perspective, and certainly breaking a lot of the promises and agreements of previous U.S. and European leaders over the years from the collapse of the Soviet Union till today. Certainly this isn't what those diplomats and previous leaders had signed up to. They would be horrified by what's happening today, including some of the biggest hawks in the U.S. foreign policy establishment like Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski. They would be horrified. They would be calling for restraint. In fact, we wouldn't even have got this far. But here we are. We're there today. But the NATO expansion isn't the main reason why Russia intervened and, quote, invaded Ukraine in February 25th, 2022. That's not the material mechanical thing, that the mechanism, if you will, why Russia invaded was invoking something that should be familiar to people in the West, which is the, quote, responsibility to protect. There was a civil war going on in Donbass between Ukraine and the Ukrainian. It's important we remember that the Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk, the eastern Ukrainian regions were part of Ukraine. And then they were then kind of declared persona non grata by the new coup government in Kiev after the Maidan coup, which was backed by the United States. This is all very well recorded. It's part of the historical record, and so then they forced the change of government, and then the U.S. handpicked the caretaker government. They put in their first President Poroshenko. They had an election, but it was an unconstitutional government after the coup, and then a civil war began. The Ukraine government, with the backing of the U.S. and NATO, basically raised their army to attack their own citizens in the east, the Russian-speaking regions, and they declared Russian language illegal in some cases, and so that's a major affront to people living in that country. So it's a civil war. What happens in civil wars? Well, countries split up. You get autonomous regions, and that's exactly what happened. The other thing that happens with civil wars is you get failed states throughout history, and this is no different. But how it's being framed in the West is Vladimir Putin woke up on the wrong side of the bed and decided to, rekindle the glory of the former Soviet Empire. And that's as far as the analysis goes for any Western politician or mainstream media. They're all on basically what was agreed in when Theresa May was prime minister. The rapid response mechanism. No, people don't know about this. That was a directive passed in the latter years of Theresa May's premiership that said on any major national security issues that all G7 and NATO countries will be on message on media. They thought it was that important. The narratives have to be the same, and that's why you see the unanimity in the press as well. So for Ukraine, this is absolutely in play. And so Russia basically didn't intervene in 8 years. Why? Because there was a UN Security Council resolution 2202 which was passed unanimously at the UN level. That never happens, does it, these days? But it was. And that was to implement what was called the Minsk Peace Accords and the Minsk 1 and 2 peace process. And so everybody agreed, we're going to do this because we want to stop the killing. 14,000 people were killed in the Donbass during that time. And Russia could not intervene legally, though, because this was still part of Ukraine. So what happened? Eventually, Minsk died because France and Germany, and they both leaders admitted later in interviews that they dragged their heels to buy time to arm the Ukraine to NATO standard. So they knew the war was coming. They just needed to do, the West needed to do what they could to antagonize Russia, to get them to invade, to basically drop a package of sanctions on them that the world had never seen. Sanctions like the thousands of sanctions were being prepared on the wings so that when Russia crossed that border, and Biden telegraphed this a number of times, if Russia crosses that border, they're going to regret it. We will come down so hard on them with it. So they were ready for all this. And then Donetsk and Lugansk, eventually, when Minsk collapsed, and then Zelensky announced a major offensive in spring of 2021 to retake the Donbass, Russia knew at that point they had to start basically preparing for some kind of a, quote, humanitarian intervention or responsibly protect action to protect their people that they view, the Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine. And how this played out in the end was Russia sent a last-minute plea to the United States, to Antony Blinken, who is Biden's Secretary of State, saying, you know, this is unacceptable. We need to avoid war. We need to come and sign a new agreement for a security architecture for this region. Ukraine cannot be a NATO country. We can't risk having nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory. This would be a major security affront for Russia. It's unacceptable. Let's come to and stop the war in Donbass, and let's get the Minsk peace process done, which would give autonomous status to Donetsk, Lugansk, and the eastern regions. Kiev didn't want this. NATO didn't want this. Britain didn't want this, and certainly Washington didn't want this. Yeah.
Could I just cut in? Why? Why didn't they want it?
They didn't want that because they have plans, and which they are now doing, to use Ukraine as a cudgel.
So that's true. That side of it's true then.
Well, 100%. You just have to go look at the policies and the actions that have played out that absolutely prove that that's exactly what happened. But Russia couldn't move until those regions declared independence from Ukraine, and when they did, legally, UN Charter, Article 1, right to self-determination. That's in the UN Charter. They followed that. Then Russia recognized them as independent states and then invited them to join accession to the Russian Federation, all done by the book. And so once that happened, then Russia moved their military assets in. But those were Ukrainian militias for the most part, which were comprised of a lot of defectors from the Ukrainian military in Donetsk and Lugansk, which is interesting. The same, you had massive defections in Crimea after the coup. So these were people that were worried about their future, and they're being sort of made illegal Russian citizen or Russian speakers, not given representation in parliament, in the Rada, in Kiev. So they're like, this is a basket case, U.S. coup going on here with Nazis running around, basically Ukrainian nationalists spouting anti-Russian slogans, marching in the street with torches. This is not going to work for us. We want to renegotiate our relationship. So that's how it started. Russia intervenes. The rest is history. And now we have, the situation we have right now. So,
and is it, loosely speaking, was the objective, according to you, to draw Russia into a war?
Yes.
But was the reason because they thought it would destabilize Russia?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So you have to understand, like in Washington, people are not very creative. So they look at things in history, and even if they're true or not, they have a narrative. And the narrative in the Cold War was, we bankrupted the Soviet Union. We bankrupted them in Afghanistan, We drew them into their Vietnam, and then we did Star Wars and the SDI program under Reagan, and that bankrupted the Soviets. And we won the arms race. We won the Cold War. Capitalism wins. Communism is defeated. But it was a lot more complicated than that. The Soviet Union kind of was already in collapse on its own, economically, politically. It could not maintain the system that it had, constructed over those years. So there were many reasons why it met its demise. Plus, the political realities in the Soviet Union were just the people were no longer buying, the dream anymore. So, and a lot of these things that the U.S. take credit for are really just kind of the knockout blows, but not even a knockout punch, just a little tap, and it was ready to fall over. And so they think that another round of sanctions, we can defeat the Russian Empire. So they're saying, well, let's do this round of sanctions. We're going to bring Russia to their knees. The people are going to rise up, throw Vladimir Putin out. I'm giving you verbatim quotes from Lindsey Graham and all these sort of senators who was saying this stuff for months. They believe it. And the reality is something different. So if they can't get the history right, if your belief of history is a series of tropes and Western propaganda that's suited for whatever the political milieu of the day is, and then you're basing the current on old tropes, thinking you can repeat that recipe of success, it's not going to work because you're not dealing with reality. And what they've done is hugely underestimate the capability, resilience of the Russian Federation militarily, politically, and economically, to the point where the Russian GDP is outperforming Europe and everybody else the last 2 years. How is that possible under a full global embargo? It seems impossible, yet this is what's happened. So somebody has missed a big part of the picture. Why? For political expediency, for virtue signaling that we're still number one at NATO. And I think all of this could have been inverted within weeks of the war breaking out. They had a peace deal on the table in Istanbul in March 2022, and it was already signed. The Ukrainian, Zelensky had already signed off on it. Putin had signed off on it, and Russia withdrew its troops from Kiev as part of that agreement. And then Boris Johnson came in to basically say, no, you're not going to sign that. You're not going to do that. We're going to back you with more arms. We're going to win this thing. Just get behind us, and we're going to bring you across the finish line, Ukraine. And look where we are now. It's an unmitigated disaster.
Right. Let's assume all that's true. Why? Why did Boris Johnson go over there to carry this thing on? What's the grand conspiracy here?
He's the emissary for the I would say they call it the Anglo-American Empire, NATO being the military arm of that. All the European countries are second junior partners. It is the United States and Britain. Everybody else locks in below that, okay? They're useful for the city of London, Washington, and New York, and that's where the power is in NATO. And the vision is, if you believe U.S. think tanks, is to overextend Russia. I'm talking about the RAND Corporation and a whole host of other strategic think tanks. And also from the EU, Collectivist was talking about breaking Russia up into 10 different parts. It's too big. We need to break it up. It's too much of a threat to European democracy. What democracy? So we need to break it up. We need to clip Russia's wings. And, it all sounds great, but Europe's not willing to send one soldier. They're not willing to, spill any blood to fight the Russians, but they're happy to get the Ukrainians to die in large numbers to sacrifice at the altar of the European NATO elite collective vanity. Fine, a couple 500,000-700,000 Ukrainians for NATO's ego. For our legacy glory of European dominance of the last millennia in the world. I mean, that's kind of we're at a time that we're in a transition period where the old world order has, we're in a post-colonial. We're still in a post-colonial epoch where the old world order is still holding on to the last vestiges of its global power, and the reality is Asia is rising up. Financially, culturally, politically, and technologically as well. China, of course, being the main driver. India also. These are not backwater colonies anymore. But when Britain was in the ascendancy, when it had its empire, those were backwater economies. But they're not anymore. But the problem is the Europeans and the Anglo-American establishment still are thinking with the 300-year-old Great Game Playbook, which is to break up the Eurasian landmass and prevent Germany and Russia from developing ties, and to sever, links with Iran and Central Asia, overland trade routes, Silk Road. That's what every single war from the mid 1900s was about. It was to establish maritime dominance, and because who controlled all of the maritime nodes? British and then later the Americans. And not just the trading and the commercial nodes, but the legal framework, the global insurance framework, the East India, right back to the East India Company, and so forth. Holland is the Dutch are also a very important part of that history in terms of shipping and finance and trade. So that's the dominant paradigm for a long time, and only in recent years has that been challenged. And that's a lot of what this is about. And so is this productive? Is this going to go anywhere? Or is this just going to lead to more war? That's kind of a fundamental question that we all need to ask ourselves, because we're being asked to back all this as the public and contribute to it and pay for it and give our blessing to our governments that this is the right way to go. We need to fight the Russians. Do we really need to fight the Russians, though? Is there another way to do this where we can all kind of be prosperous?
So according to you, then, this is all of these wars and everything that you see going on currently. These are all geopolitical moves. They're not like, companies that's selling arms who are speaking in politicians' ears and telling them, "Oh, we need." No,
it is that as well.
Is that as well, right?
Oh, it is that as well. That's the profitable end. Those are the profitable ends of those geopolitical maneuvers, and they're not the only. You have the energy, you have the gas, the oil, commodities markets. You have lots of other areas, and just. Look, from the United States point of view, it's about creating dollar zones, because those dollar zones prop up the value of the dollar as a world reserve currency, and that is the source of U.S. deficit spending, which gives them $1 trillion to have military dominance that no other country can do that. Only the U.S. can do that. And it's not like they have the money to do it. They make the money to do it. They print the money to do it. And they do that the value of the dollar doesn't collapse because there's so much dollars in circulation globally. How do you create dollar zones? You occupy, you create military bases. You have South Korea, North Korea, DMZ. You have Japan, military occupied. You have Germany, Ramstein and Stuttgart. And all of these other, you have 47 bases around Scandinavia. We've got Britain. That's dollars, euro dollars. Just the U.S. military presence, which isn't as much as it was in the 80s, but it's just the military presence in Europe alone creates a demand for a significant amount of euro dollars. That's aside from what the banks are doing in Dusseldorf and Frankfurt. And of course,
the denominating assets in dollars or oil or whatever.
Commodities.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So that's also what it's about. So it's as you said, and more. But the big shifts, the big movements are geopolitical. And so that's those tectonic plates.
Do they come first?
Yes.
So the arms, the selling of arms is downstream from the power moves of the geopolitical power moves.
Absolutely. And then the higher level of that, above the geopolitics, is the civilizational direction.
Well, hold on a minute. That sounds interesting. That's the realm in which truthers would probably say there's a grand conspiracy, right?
Yeah. Well, historically, there would be. So if you think about Pax Romana.
What's that?
Pax Romana is the Roman Empire.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Everything Roman. Pax, everything Roman. Roman language, Roman money, Roman law, Roman literature, Roman education, Roman infrastructure, Roman roads.
Romance languages.
Roman arches and buildings, everything. Roman culture. You know, you go to Bath and you can see remnants of Roman culture in England. And so that's Pax Romana. Now it's Pax Americana, but before that was Pax Britannia. And I will argue that Pax Britannia was closer to Pax Romana than Pax Americana, because Pax Britannia gave the English language as the global second language of the world. And America is really piggybacked on the back of that. We're talking the education system, the legal system, the political systems, the democratic system, the parliamentary systems. It's all British, much of it. So that's a civilizational direction. And so there are people in, you could say that the elites in the Anglo-American world, their biggest concern planning forward in the next, 100 or 200 or, 500 years or whatever. And I'm not even talking about the church and the Vatican and Christianity in terms of Europe and globally. That's part of this conversation. But so they're asking themselves, do we want the future of the world? Right now, the future of the world is an English-speaking dominated direction. The ship is being steered with an Anglo-American captain, and Pax Americana / Britannia, if you will, and Europa, Pax Europa as well, because European culture is also included in this. But is it going to be Pax China? What's Pax China look like?
God knows.
For the rest of the world.
We know because it's a rather large country already.
Linguistically, like, are kids going to all learn Chinese as a second language in 100 years? Like, is that the future?
Can I ask you a quick question about Pax Europana? Oh no,
We'll say Europa. Yeah.
How does the whole migration thing fit into this? Because one of the big memes in the alternative media is that the migration thing is some kind of plan to basically destabilize Europe, right? Is that what do you think about that plan even in itself, or that idea?
I think it. Well, let's just ask what's happening. Is it destabilizing Europe politically? I would say it's on the way to destabilizing Europe politically, for sure. And a lot of the destabilization is also coming on the back of, I think, a lot of ethnic and religious strife and what I would call sectarian issues that are developing. Because I've seen sectarianism in the Middle East, okay, and I know what the end result is, and it becomes generational, and it never ends. So this is not a path you generally want to go on. And Europe chose not to go down that route after the Enlightenment and started to build, egalitarian societies, merit-based societies, constitutional governments and structures where you have rights, Bill of Rights, and things like that. And for all its criticisms, and these would include multi-ethnic democracies. America being like the obvious example of this, okay? And so now we're in a situation where, because of the clash, this supposed clash of civilizations, there's people that are now advocating to roll back some of these principles and some of these things that have been developed or put into place.
Who's advocating that, though?
With the remigration.
People.
Yeah.
So you think there is something? Do you think there's a conscious push behind that?
I think there's a conscious push, but there's also a wing of the establishment that's putting a lot of money into pushing this.
Why?
This is a good question, and this is worth investigating. This is worth looking into, and I think this conversation needs to be developed. There's more than a few stakeholders in this. More than a few. Transnational corporations favor immigration for obvious reasons. So we have different levels of the conversation. We have the street level, which is obvious: football terraces, angry guys in the pub, which crosses adorned in the cross of St. George, the Muslims and whatever. Tommy Robinson's kind of on that level. Then you would go up to the higher level, which is government policy level. And so government policy have issues of, they're looking at birth rates declining. White European birth rates have fallen off a cliff. This is devastating on many levels to government institutions, many of which are funded per head or based on what you might say, crudely, bums on seats, schools, NHS, other institutions. Whether you have a viable bank branch or a post office in your town might come down to, in today's world of government efficiency, well, it's just not worth it. We don't have the customer base because we're now customers, right? We used to not be customers, but now we're customers of everything, all these government services or privatized services. So there's that level. Government's bringing in millions of people through normal ports of entry, and that's clearly policy. And this was also ramped up in many ways under Tory government. Surprise, surprise. Why was that? I thought conservatives are generally against immigration. So obviously, if the Transnational is pro-immigration, then of course the Tory would also be pro-transnational, ergo they're going to adopt policies that transnational corporations are happy about. And immigration's one of them. And it's not necessarily a choice. So when you're running a country or you're running a few countries, you have to consider, are we going to shut that town down? Are we going to shut that neighborhood down? We're going to have empty buildings, empty businesses. How are we going to serve? How are we going to keep the institutions going? How's it going to be funded? There's a certain level of corruption as well, self-serving corruption within the bureaucracy, of course. And we're getting into the Soviet failure conversation there because we've constructed similar structures, hierarchy, vertical structures that the very thing that created failure in the Soviet system. Big, massive vertical structures where everything went up and you go to the top and you can come down. They didn't talk to each other like this. They went up and then they talked at that level and then came down. And that was one of the failures of that system. We have constructed a private-public version of this in modern West. And so now we go to the higher level of the conversation. That's what the investment banks are being briefed on. Do we see those meetings? Do we see those PowerPoint presentations? We get glimpses of them. And those consultants are briefing the Pentagon, and they're briefing the DOD and the MOD in Britain, and they're briefing them about trends and movements and economic movements in the Middle East, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and so forth. Major Wall Street banks are advising governments and our military on these issues of how to move people from what they call the gap. These are third world countries, developing world countries, to what they call the core being advanced modern democracies. I'm telling you verbatim from presentations by Cantor Fitzgerald to the United States Pentagon post 9/11. And these are long-term programs. They're managing the globe. They're moving people from A to B. How do you move them? You start a war. And where are the biggest migrant flows coming into Europe? Well, let's just start with Libya. What was that? That was a NATO intervention. On what grounds? No grounds at all. And that took the safety valve off of sub-Saharan African migration into Europe from Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and so forth. The Sudanese Civil War. How did that happen? The CIA heavily involved in the partition of Sudan. And I could go on. Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Civil War, and so forth. Massive amount of sub-Saharan Africans into Europe, into the UK, into Italy. Next, Syria. Next, Afghanistan. That's Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all of the Central Asian migration flows. Direct result of the Afghan war. Iraq, another one. Yugoslavia, the Balkans, Kosovo, Albania. That's the bulk of UK immigration during Tony Blair's first 2 terms. NATO intervention didn't need to happen. Stable. No, we had to break up Yugoslavia. We're here. We're in Serbia. So Syria, perfect example. Why does Syria need to be broken up? Why did the government need to be overthrown in Syria? Well, we're told, back to our propaganda conversation, the BBC line is, Bashar al-Assad was an evil dictator. He was a bloodthirsty butcher, much like Vladimir Putin's an evil dictator. No other reason than that. They're just evil dictators, and they're killing their own people. We need to overthrow them. No, there was a specific reason for that. Now we can see it. Now you have a terrorist in charge in Syria. The government's long gone, and Israel has occupied the entire corridor of southern Syria, the Golan Heights, Mount Hermon, all the way up to practically Iraqi Kurdistan with the U.S. So that's a total strategic reshuffle of the most important piece of real estate in the Middle East. Like that, it took 15 years, And what do we get in Europe? We get the migrant backlash from that. And are we going to question our governments of why they did this in the first place? Nope. That's not where the government or the media wants to have that conversation.
But the way you're describing, I mean, that does seem incredible that someone sits down and plans. It's like moving cars in a car park.
I can send you the link to the presentation if you want.
But it's kind of hinting at, well, what is the reason behind it? I mean, take that whole scenario you've just described. The result being migration to Europe. It doesn't seem like that's the reason they did it. It seemed, or is it?
Oh,
I mean,
I think
what about all the other stuff? What about the shifting borders or the breaking up countries so they're not as strong?
No, that's it. Right. So the migration is a byproduct of
a useful byproduct.
Yeah, but the protection of the state of Israel is probably for the United States is the most important Middle Eastern issue.
Yeah, why is that?
Because Israel is basically the beachhead, traditionally, of the Anglo-American Empire.
Wait a minute, I don't even understand that. What do you mean beachhead?
It's the last colonial settler project practically in the world.
You mean after the war when they decided to give Israel a homeland
So think about all the colonies are going independent around 1948, and they create a new British-backed and paid for a colonial project. They created the state of Israel. It was born out of the First World War.
But why is it so important?
Because it allows I'll tell you why. Because during the Cold War, the biggest threat to the U.S. and the West was not communism in the Middle East. It was Arab nationalism, and that was after World War I, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. That is one of the main reasons why World War I was waged, to keep the Ottoman Empire and Germany.
Jesus, we've got to slow down, mate.
Well, but just understand, oil was just discovered in the early 20th century, and the British and the French did not want the Germans to get a hold of Iraq, the Iraqi oil fields in Kirkuk. That's why they had to create the Arab revolt at Lawrence of Arabia. You know the story, to basically defeat the Ottomans, because they didn't want that in German hands, because Germans were allied with the Ottomans. Very important. So they promised the Arabs an independent Arab state in Palestine, the British and the French, as long as you fight for us against the Turks. And they fought, and what happened at the end? The British and the French decided behind their back to draw the borders differently. Anyway, the British took Palestine and then gave it to Israel in 1948. And the Arabs felt like they were betrayed. They had a few kings, like in Jordan, Hashemite king in Jordan, and then they gave the Saudis a couple of families of Bedouins who were, may or may not deserve to have a country named after them, but they gave them the Emirates. And so it's a very fast digested history of the Middle East. But the bottom line was that Arab nationalism was the biggest threat to the British and to the West, because they couldn't control Arab nationalist states, especially secular states. And if they happened to go socialist, that would even be worse, obviously. And that's why Iran was overthrown. The government in Iran, the U.S. and the British overthrew the Iranian government in 1953 for that very reason. They went to nationalize the oil, and BP was not going to have that.
So was the Arab nationalization threat an oil thing?
Namely oil, but also the Suez Canal.
Oh, sure, of course, yeah. Jesus.
Gamal Abdel Nasser was a mercurial leader of Egypt, and the Suez Crisis and everything that kind of unfolded after that. That's when you started to see the new Middle East take shape, after the Suez Crisis. And that's when the Middle East was handed from the British to the Americans. That was the result of the Suez Crisis.
Slight right angle out of this, because we could go on forever here. Why is Israel so important now, and why does everyone get so upset about it? Like, why do most people in the sort of, well, I don't know whether it's most people, but a lot of people in the kind of alternative media think there's a cabal of Jewish people running the world, and that's why Mossad are the reason that everyone's in the U.S. Senate is scared to talk about,
or the Epstein's blackmailing
all this kind
all
of
the
stuff.
elites.
Yeah.
Well, look, there might be truth to some of this, but I don't like to kind of ruminate on, this Jewish cabal, whatever it's called. Because to me, it's just like, it's not just a rabbit hole, but it's also a trap, because you're getting sucked into ethnic or religious arguments.
All right.
To me, it's about raw power, empire, and geopolitics.
So why is Israel so bloody important? Why does everyone seem to it says certainly in the States, why is, considering it's such a small place really and could be inconsequential, it's not. It's made something consequential.
It's so consequential, in fact, that it enjoys unqualified support for the United States financially and militarily. The entire U.S. military footprint in the Middle East is to protect Israel.
Yeah. So come on, why?
Because there's two reasons. Israel is allowed to pursue its greater Israel ambitions, which Netanyahu admitted recently. Greater Israel.
What does that mean?
That means the expansion of the state of Israel, or at least the control of the surrounding countries under Israeli authority. This was thought to be a conspiracy theory, but in fact, this has great academic grounding in the Israeli political literature, right back to the 1980s. An Israeli minister named Odi Yinon penned a strategic paper back then that became the blueprint. If you read it now, it's chapter and verse, everything that has happened pretty much right up to the present moment, including the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And they had the Sinai Peninsula for a brief period of time after the 6-Day War, I believe, and then gave it back in a peace treaty with, interim peace agreement with the Egyptians. But Israel is an important Western enclave in an Arab world. Okay, and so the United States will not give that up. But by the same token, it's developed the Israeli lobby in the United States enjoys unrivaled power in terms of its sponsorship and tutelage of congressmen and senators coming through the ranks in U.S. politics that are going to vote pro-Israel on all and every issue. So it's a symbiotic relationship. The U.S. will support Israel so long as Israel helps the U.S. and the European powers and UK advance their geopolitical interests and objectives. And if that objective is taking down the regime in Iran in order to prevent China from expanding the Belt and Road Initiative, or giving an example, there's a middle corridor project between Russia and Iran to link up port of Mumbai to Moscow. That's not happening. That's not happening right now, but that would change the economic commercial flow of the entire Eurasian continent. And Iraq has also similar programs. Qatar and other countries have plans for a Trans-Arabian pipeline to connect the Mediterranean to Europe. There's all of these competing agendas going on. So that's why we have conflict. That's why we have war. The minute Israel becomes a liability
you reckon they'll be dropped
to global capital, then the agenda will change.
But what could that be? Because it wouldn't necessarily happen, because they are like the way you described it, a beacon in the Arab world. They're an outpost. Right?
They're an outpost for U.S. interests, and U.S. and European interests is to keep the Middle East unstable. The Emirates can be stable because it's easy to control monarchies when the monarch deposits all of their dollars in your bank accounts. In New York, the petrodollar has propped up the United States economy and kept the Gulf Arabs rich for many decades. But things are shifting and changing. Global capital will decide who's going to have a place in the future. And when Israel becomes a liability is when its brand becomes so damaged globally because of extremist political or Zionist objectives to cleanse the whole of Gaza of the native Palestinian population against, umpteen UN resolutions and a whole body of international law over the last 70, 80 years. And that's seen as an affront by most of the world, but not the U.S. But what matters is what the U.S. thinks.
This is another question that's a little bit left field. What did you make of that video Trump put out of Gaza? Now, why did he do that? What was that all about?
Insane.
Yeah, why? I didn't understand it. I thought it could be a funny joke if you were a really dark motherfucker. Do you know what I mean? Like, but you don't do that in politics. It's
not
like,
as a president of the United States
Yeah.
to put out that type of that material.
so why did he do it? It didn't seem to serve a purpose.
It brings it calls into question what is going on in the Trump administration.
Right.
What type of people? What's the culture like? Are they tethered to reality? It calls corruption issues into question. I mean, this is not behavior that you want to see, no matter who you support. Me, as an old school American, I don't want to see my president putting that stuff out on social media.
But what do you think they thought it would do?
It's a bit insidious. It's almost like they're trolling.
Yeah, that's what it's.
They're trolling the Palestinians. They're trolling people who support the end to what the international courts of justice and now the entire body of Jewish genocide scholarship is calling a genocide in Gaza. Okay, not my opinion. So the lobby and the people who are supporting Netanyahu and this effort, things are getting weird. You have soldiers doing TikTok videos of blowing up schools and churches and in the background, and this is not normal behavior. So, the world is in a very, very strange moment. We've never seen anything like this before, and there's reams and reams of this out. And the Harvard Dataverse put out a report: dead or missing 377,000 in Gaza. That's a lot more than the 62,000 they have in the register, but most of the names they can't find because the bodies are missing. So this is unprecedented. This is new territory for us. We don't have the tools to process this as a society. It's just nothing that we have experience with.
Well, what's going on there?
Things have gotten out of control.
Yeah, what do you mean? Is it like what, the berserkers or something? Are we going berserk?
We're going into great power like World War I, great power politics, and even go back even to medieval times. I mean, there's a level of brutality and barbarity that I think has reared its head and does periodically in history. And it usually is a prelude to a major global conflagration. I hope that doesn't happen. No one wants that to happen. But collective madness. A collective people are losing their minds in powerful places. And all that matters is power. All that matters is power. Ethics and morals are secondary concerns right now. Discretion is no longer a thing in politics. Just from this thing you're talking about, this film that was put out by Trump. Where's the discretion? Doesn't matter anymore. What are we dealing with here? I have no vocabulary to describe this. For my whole life of watching politics, I cannot put this into any context. And so there's a level of paralysis that has been induced as a result of this. It's like shock and awe. We're in a shock and awe situation in history. And a lot of people just do not know how to react to it. So what do? They just stay despondent and silent.
Is this because we've lived in a bit of a bubble for a number of years since the war? I mean,
yes,
because
100%.
when you look at what happened in World War I and World War II, it was disgusting and despicable, and it was horrendous. All the shit that went down in World War I, sending young boys off to rot in trenches and all this horrendous murder and suffering, Yeah. And we've just lived through a really nice patch. So now it seems a little bit out of the ordinary, but actually it's possibly the modus operandi of the human species.
Yeah,
actually,
born during peacetime. My parents were born during peacetime. I was born. My kids will be born during peacetime. 4 generations in peacetime, and we outsource our violence now. We don't have to do it on European shores. We don't even have to send troops. It'll be missiles, targeted missiles, drones, and we're not even there yet. We're getting into a new paradigm, which could actually be quite dangerous. Because it could trigger nuclear response. And it's not like sending thousands of people to the front anymore. Not going to happen like that. So the reason is we're all detached now from the process. We're not being conscripted in Western Europe, not yet, but they're talking about conscription in Germany and other countries and getting ready to confront the Russian menace. I mean, is that going to get any purchase in the general public? Doesn't sound like it's very popular. So what's going on here?
Who the hell is going to fight for the UK?
Or Germany or Macron? Who's going to go in a trench for Emmanuel Macron? Do you know what I mean? I mean, maybe they'll fight for Candace Owens, but not. She's the Joan of Arc of France. I mean, she could be president. I think probably.
Oh my God! So yeah, geopolitics, man, it's horrendous. I mean, it's a bloody chess game with absolutely no morals whatsoever. There's no honor amongst thieves in that chess game.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. All the civility that we built up, just think about it. All of the institutions that we put in place after the Second World War, from the United Nations, love it or hate it, the Geneva Conventions, the Genocide Convention, the Human Rights Convention, the WTO, all of these multilateral institutions that were constructed for the purpose of avoiding the biggest crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity of all time. All of these things have been dismantled, or the International Courts of Justice, the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Many of them have been, hobbled in order to protect Israel, quite frankly, and will eventually, be dealt severe institutional blows. Why? Because it's not really about Israel; it's about the United States. The United States is protecting Israel because Israel is doing the U.S. and the Western or Anglo establishment. You're bidding in the region, but things are coming to a head. And what I'm talking about is the old order, and the old order is running up against a new reality, and the new reality is we have to make a choice whether we're going to have an imagination to create systems that will work for everybody rather than a security competition, which ultimately becomes a dilemma. And that dilemma always ends in war, historically. So do we have a better playbook than this? Because that's what we've been running for the last 300 years.
Well, I mean, I would argue the new order is about centralization of power, isn't it? Even further. I mean, do we ever is it possible to head towards, like, a lot of people say there'll be a one world government, say. I find that difficult to think through when you think about China and America.
Well, that's the competing world. There's competing orders in the multipolar world, what people are calling a multipolar world with multi-centers of power. And BRICS, as an example, as a network of countries, is competing to be part of that multipolar order. It doesn't want to dominate the whole planet, but it wants to be able to look after the interests of its members, i.e. Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and about a dozen other countries. And so that's competing from a unipolar hegemon, which is a U.S. dominated. And in the Cold War, it was bipolar. It was Soviet, U.S., Western Soviet balance of power. So bipolar after the Second World War, unipolar after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then the potential for a multipolar world now, but there's people that don't want this, and they're kicking and screaming all the way to the end. And I think it will hopefully work itself out, but the question that we have is what damage could be done through that transition. I think it'll work itself out eventually. I think it will. I think, and so will there be a place for decentralized systems in the new order. But what damage can be done in the interim, and who's going to be at risk of that, let's say, blast zone in the interim? That's the concern. I truly believe that we are going to transition to have better and more options in the future, and that one world government that many of us were scared about. In America, you go to the John Birch Society, one world government right back to the 1950s. But I think the new world that's emerging is much more complex than what we imagine. It's not going to be Klaus Schwab giving diktats down the pipeline from the World Economic Forum with Bill Gates behind him funding it all.
Well, that's good to hear, I must admit. In the same sense that the old world order thought Russia would cave under by drawing them into a war, but actually it didn't work at all. That's what the old world thinks. That's what Klaus Schwab thinks, you know.
Yeah, or that's what the neocons think, or Lindsey Graham or the Warhawks in Washington think, or, you know, or the Blue Rinse Brigade, you know, and Boris think. You know,
so really the what's that organization that called you a conspiracy theorist network?
Oh, many of them, but
right.
One of them was
they were kind of right. I mean, there is a grand conspiracy. Power is conspiring to maintain power, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
it is. Do you think there's any legs in the grand conspiracy that it's a number of families, or is that?
I think for sure there are Bilderberg is a good example. The Bilderberg group meets every year. They met in Stockholm, Sweden this year, and the host of the Bilderberg was really the Wallenberg family. And the Wallenberg family are, you know, the owners of AB Investor AB, a Swedish conglomerate of companies, huge players in defense, telecommunications, one of the most powerful portfolios of companies in Europe. And are now playing, you know, have been playing a central role in at the European, you know, elite, transnational, corporate, and defense and political level for a very long time, as an example. And that's a family that's dominated by a family. And then we have the same hereditary oligarchies in other countries, and including the UK and other countries. So it's ultimately, of course, it's going to comprise of families.
But I mean, the only reason I ask is because it could be states. It could be you know, states rise and fall, and leaders rise and fall. But the kind of the grand conspiracy theory about the kind of the puppet masters is that it's generational. Do you think it's true or not?
I think the problem with the alternative conspiracy theory community, if you will, or culture, is there's a proclivity to have a unifying conspiracy, like a skeleton key that unlocks all questions.
That's what I think I've got. And I'm looking for.
But you're not alone. You're not alone. Everyone wants to know who's in charge, what's the top look like, and the reality is probably a lot more complex lattice of interests. The best metaphor is probably organized crime networks. It's a very complex international lattice of families and organizations that could just as easily be corporations and banks, and many of them are into corporations and banks, like HSBC and so forth, that got busted for laundering billions of dollars in Colombian cartel cocaine cash, as an example. But the reality is, it's all of those things. With state power coalesces with ruling families. You know, the Committee of 300, if you will, and because the most powerful organizing principle on the planet is still the modern nation state, and they have the military. So ultimately, the state has power, but if the state is under effective control of oligarchs, then the oligarchs control that state power. Where you have the difference is countries that have, let's say, not state-owned banks, central banks, rather than a private central bank, and where the oligarch families aren't in charge, but maybe a bureaucracy, socialist bureaucracy is in charge. And then we're back to the ideological Cold War conversation. And so it does come back to that. So, and we're constantly oscillating between these things in history.
We're oscillating between the frying pan and the fire, aren't we?
Yeah.
Well, where's the utopia that we all want to live in? We want to be left alone, right? Come on, what's your strategy going forwards in the world? Well,
you know, yeah. I mean, I'm personally, I'm definitely more along that libertarian philosophy of small as government as possible, not to interfere too much with the market.
But we don't see that evolving at all, do we?
Well, we have monopolies and rent seekers that have taken advantage of those opportunities. And so think of it like society's like a pendulum. I mean, you're British, so you've seen this pendulum swing in your lifetime, and your parents have seen it swing too. And unfortunately, it swings, and sometimes we don't necessarily, not everyone's going to like the direction it's going to be swinging in, but there's going to be an inevitable reaction to any situation that's becoming extreme. And if you're living in an extreme rent-sinking monopolistic political economy, the pendulum will eventually swing, and it's going to swing, quote, left in many cases. But then it might end up being co-opted, and you might end up getting an entrenched fascist, socialist, or whatever, collectivist. Super bureaucracy, technocracy
I think
in charge.
That's something that people back home in the UK, we both live in the UK. You don't mind me saying that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think something that people in the UK don't ever contemplate is that something like a communist state could appear in the UK. Because when you hang around places like we're in Serbia at the moment, when you hang around places like this where it's recent, or in Prague where we are, it's all recent. It's much more real to you, even to me as an outsider, talking to people who've lived through those kind of regimes. And you realize just how possible it is I know there's a lot of people now say the UK has got some very strong tendencies towards authoritarian states. We've got people getting arrested for tweets. We've got, like some really bizarre things going on. And still, alarm bells aren't really ringing.
But authoritarianism and authoritarian structures aren't necessarily left communist authoritarian. It can be right-wing authoritarian. It can be right-wing corporatist fascist, just as easily as the other way. I think you need to look at what's happening in China. You look at what's happening in countries like Russia, where you have a state-directed economy, but you have a free market for the people, but the political establishment taking the reins of key aspects of the economy, but capital can never rise above the state or the party in China's case, right? The Communist Party of China. The state capital can never, if it goes too high, if the bird flies too high, its wings will be clipped. Jack Ma, Alibaba is a good example. And that's the difference. But the performance is there, because to make those changes and to adapt in the ebb and flow of technology and modernity and technological revolutions and changes in society and infrastructure and expectations, you need continuity of government, and China has that. So, but they don't have the sort of liberal democracy that we think we have or have. So that's their system. They couldn't have done what I think they've done if they had an open democratic system that we could then put our people in and turn them into a vassal of a neo-colonial vassal of Western corporate interests. And so they've fortified themselves from that. That's why they have a hard shell. This is why Russia has a hard shell, because of what happened in the 90s, Wall Street. Neoliberal economists raping the country and basically looting it. That's why you got Putin. It was a reaction to the 90s. Yeltsin was drunk. Wall Street came in, raped the country. The oligarchs ran off with all the state industry, and the people were poor. Life expectancy for men was like 63 or something crazy like that. And they said, never again. And so Putin came in, and they've backed him for 20-something years. And look at the results. You can't argue with the results. And that's why he's popular. And that's why our governments hate him. They revile him. They would love to have a 75% approval rating. But we see that. We project our cynicism. We like our 25% approval rating presidents like Biden and Macron.
We haven't even got that.
And we celebrate that as democracy. And we have spitting image puppet shows to make fun of it. And that's our freedom. Wow, we've got that. But are they performing for us? I don't think they're performing very well.
Well, no, the democratic, in its current state, system is an absolute shit show, and it doesn't serve the people. I mean, I think that's the red pill people are taking at the moment, because the democracy is untouchable. We fight for democracy.
It's a religion.
Yeah, but it's a load of nonsense.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, and currently Starmer was voted in on 20% of the country. Mm-hmm. That's not, like that. He's hated, and he's still got in power.
Yep.
He failed. Like if that was an exam result, you failed massively.
But he's in charge.
Yes, exactly. Well, it is.
We should celebrate that. That's our democracy.
Yeah.
Great.
But do you think then, going back to the pendulum and the really big swinging pendulum, not the little 4-year pendulums and stuff. The big one, which is, I think, sort of collectivism to individualism. Do you know what I mean? And we're collectivism, aren't we, at the moment?
Well, the other thing in that pendulum that you have to pay attention to, it's more than that. Maybe it was that before. Now we have technology, and the state has tools and apparatchi and technocratic abilities through Palantir, databases, surveillance, digital social credit, central bank digital currencies, all this sort of stuff, digital ID. Now that pendulum is a very different pendulum. And it does lean towards state. The state has accumulated great capabilities and powers to control the individual and also to cut people off, to contain people based on, their political beliefs or whether they're going to be with the program or not, or, whatever. Very Orwellian. And so that changes things. It's a different game now. You're going against much more difficult, much less freedom in many ways than ever before. That does change the discussion a lot.
What you're describing, something we talk about a lot on this podcast, is the fact that technology is allowing authoritarianism to scale beyond the kind of empires that we used to have, which collapsed under the weight of the fact that there literally weren't enough people to enforce their rules.
Yes.
In the country. They couldn't employ enough people. But you don't have that problem now, because you don't even need to employ people. You have an algorithmic system which exists on your phone, and you don't even need a legal system, really, because all that does is it stops you, it dictates what you can and can't do before you even do it. So committing crimes becomes much more difficult in a way, because your ability to operate in the world is dictated by a bunch of rules which are already laid on top of you.
Yeah, and you're not going to be negotiating with people at different points of the bureaucracy where you might get clemency, you might get some sympathy, some people give you the benefit of the doubt. Those people are disappearing.
That's already happened.
It's gone.
I have that experience continuously when I enter normie world and try and sort something out. Yeah. Bureaucratic, or even with companies these days.
Yeah. If I could just talk to a person.
So well, let's wind it up, but let's not end on a bad note, because that is a bad note. No, it is a very bad note, but it's a truthful note.
Yeah,
it's a conclusion we've come to on this podcast over many years so far, is that technology. Here's the way it goes, according to us anyway. Technology is empowering authoritarians. Okay, we know that, but like everything, there's always an equal and opposite force at work.
Yes.
And the digital world is now rife with people creating privacy and freedom tools. Right. Cool. This is good. So, and I'm using them already, and you probably are, and everyone, if you're in this world, you can use those. The bit that I struggle with is, how do we operate in the physical world when it's gate kept by these algorithms? In the sense that I wouldn't, in this dystopian future, I could not come to Serbia. Unless I managed to do a deal with someone who sailed me over to, and then I picked up a car. I mean, we're talking about, this is kind of World War I shit, where you're the resistance and you've got to do it all secretly. I mean, maybe that's where we're heading. Maybe if you want to be free, that is where we're heading. But the mainstream world is becoming so ubiquitous and so digitized and so algorithmicized, or if that's a word. How will you navigate that going forward?
I mean, if you're in the center of the authoritarian structures or those types of countries with those systems as the law, as the rule, that might be difficult. But then you have to think about relocating to either intentional communities, parallel communities, or countries that aren't in that system. And you go from there. And I think if you do resettle in those places, then you probably even can go back to the old place and then come back again and not have too much problems. But it's being anchored in those authoritarian centers that becomes difficult, because you can't exist without being, tethered to the system at every single point.
That's kind of what's happening. You see that in reality in the truther community, or from what I see. People have anchored themselves here in the weird side, and they do little forays back into the I'm using the terminology here, matrix.
Yep.
I see what you mean.
Digital and nomad community is a good example of that.
Yes.
That's global now.
Yeah, massively.
So
it's a very logical thing to do as well. It's difficult with children, but if you're a free, independent person, it makes huge sense, even from a tax perspective, just from a general governance perspective.
Yeah.
Being a foreigner in a country makes you really ungovernable. It's very difficult.
Financial perspective, just cost of living. Immediately you get a 50% discount in cost of living in many cases. 100% discount in some cases. Like
depends where you live.
Insanely cheap.
There's you and me talking. We both live in very settled lives in the UK. Yeah. We should be advising ourselves here, probably.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have had the little stints outside, and
I have a long-term plan. There's no question about it.
You've experienced that. What it would be like. You've had a chance to test.
Yeah, and we have a plan. We have a. I mean, one of the plans that I noticed being quite prevalent at the moment is, in the UK at least, people are talking about giving it till the next election, right? And because basically, when you think about it on paper, there'll be a regime change at the next election. There must be, because
never say never.
All right, never say never. But
not in British politics.
If it isn't a regime change, and by that I mean if it's not Conservative or Labour, if it's not one of the new parties, then that's the signal. That's the final bell, right? Get out,
Well, it's going to be a coalition, you see. So you're still going to have one of the old parties on some level.
Might it be a coalition of the new ones, though?
Well, it doesn't matter, because there's going to be anyway, we don't get into the nuts and bolts of it, but think of the Lib Dem, Tory.
I can't think of Lib Dems. It might get too depressed.
2010, David Cameron.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Nick Clegg, your deputy PM.
Any stage in history, recent political history in the UK, is depressing AF. Everything about everything is like. But going back to my plan, which is, if one of the new parties gets in, you give them 6 months, like you gave Trump 6 months.
Yeah.
Because there is a slim chance. I don't think the fundamental things can change. I think if you think there's too much immigration, for example, it's too late. You're not going to change that. If you think that they're too authoritarian, that could change. That could change. I mean, if you think you're being taxed too much, right, that could definitely change. That could be something. But whether it could change in the long term, I don't think it could, because in order to tax people less, they've got to find the money from somewhere else. And they've only got one other option, which is borrowing money.
Well, and back to the immigration thing. You can slow down immigration, but you're not really going to alter the demographics currently. So that's the fact that people are kind of campaigning on the issue, I think, is kind of a non-starter.
Yeah, it's here to stay.
The other issues you said, those are movable. But see, only if there's the person who's in charge has a radical economic vision where they're willing to take the risk and also the heat.
Yeah.
And, just look at that little bit Liz Truss in her 44 days as PM, the little sort of free marketeering that they crushed her so quickly, and she was out the door. The dirt didn't even get on the rug. She was out so fast.
Sometimes, though, it does take people a few goes to get their heads around that stuff. I mean, she's now doing the rounds of the alternative podcasts.
Yeah.
And people are sort of saying, oh my God, she was actually quite,
Yeah. And she's doing the right thing, actually. She's one of the smarter ones in terms of embracing new media. So I think, that's kind of like, but aside from that, there's some good people on the left that are talking about the economic in more realistic terms. And that's interesting. I've never seen that before.
The problem is, though, within the democratic system, no one is going to risk not being elected. That's the risk for a politician now. Not to make the country better. It's, can I stay in power? And staying in power involves giving people free money. This is the problem.
Yeah.
Free money. We live in this system of welfare, which is huge. The welfare budget, is it something like 30% of the total budget or something?
It's a lot.
It's a huge amount, right? Yeah. That can't change, because if you pull that, you lose all those votes.
That's a risk if you pull that. And no one wants to take a risk if you want to get elected.
Exactly.
You stick with the same safe formula. And that's the problem. We have that formula. It's even the new parties would get basically sucked into that format when it comes to the campaign, So that's always going to be the issue. I mean, Britain, now all European countries have this problem. They have this problem because they're not transitioning, I think, well enough to maintain their sort of liberty, rights, and all those great things that I think a lot of people enjoyed after the Second World War, along with all the benefits of like the NHS in the United Kingdom and so forth, these great institutions that came as a result of that. A lot of what life was like might not be able to be preserved in a way. I think that government's willing to give the people a tremendous or significant amount of freedom, because arguably we have less rights than we did in many ways before.
Well, almost certainly, because governments create laws. That's what they do. They always create more laws. There's always more laws than there was last year, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's the job of a bureaucrat, is to create laws. It's like they occasionally take some away, but there's always a net gain in laws. So we do live less free.
But by the same token, there's also, the progressive tax rates that there were in the past. We don't have those, and there are more sort of financial opportunities in certain areas and certain ways. Maybe, of course, then we're getting into an ideological and economic conversation about what it should be, and that's a different discussion.
But without going too deeply into that, I think that is one of the cruxes of certainly the problem we see currently in the UK is that there are the two schools of thought. One is, I need to manage the economy. I need, as in I'm the government. I need to basically control the economy. I need to tax people to pay for me to do this job. Versus, if we let people amass themselves and create wealth and be entrepreneurs, then our tax dollars will actually be more.
It'll be more.
Right, exactly, right. They're the two schools of thought.
Yeah.
Currently, we're with the former. They don't really. They're trying to tax us harder to get more money, and it's actually resulting in less money.
Yeah.
Right,
and wealth is leaving the country.
Exactly, right.
It's in Dubai. It's in other places.
Yes.
So the problem is, again, our democracy is failing on that level. So what did Putin do in Russia to bring the oligarchs home? Cut the tax rate, flat tax, 13% across the board. Money comes back. It started at 10%. 10%. I mean, what if the British government did that? What would happen to all the overseas money? Because I know a lot of British that would rather have businesses and open restaurant chains in England and employ British people and their kids and their nephews and nieces. They'd rather do it at home, but because there's financial impediments to that, it's there's a lot against them in terms of cost and VAT and stuff like that. Why bother?
Dude,
why bother?
It's not even remotely complicated how you kickstart the UK again.
Yeah.
It's so easy. I as a middle class business owner, I know exactly why I'm not putting my capital in the market. And as someone who might leave the country, I also know why I want to leave the country. Yeah. It's absolutely simple. It's not even, you don't need to know much about economics. You just need to leave people to be free. You need to cut the restrictions on starting businesses, and you need to lower the tax rate of the middle class.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's boom time.
And cut business rates.
Or payroll and all this
payroll
nonsense.
Tax.
All that
There's
shit.
too many things getting in the way that only big conglomerates can carry the burden of those costs.
Even because no one's buying their shit anymore.
Even they're struggling. Yeah.
Who's buying their stuff?
Yeah.
Like, it used to go, when I was, 10 years ago, people used to go shopping every weekend.
Yeah.
And now people go buy something off Amazon every now and then, but they don't go clothes shopping every weekend and spending all this lovely money that they've got.
See, no matter what European country you go to, and I've traveled a little bit in Europe, enough to see, you have people that are on entitlements. You have a certain percentage of people that, are on the dole, if you will, and so forth. Mainly my experience in France and, Holland and, let's say, the UK and Ireland. But you also have people that are entrepreneurial and innovative, and you have a high level of human capital in that department. Britain is probably one of the most successful entrepreneurial populations in terms of innovation and smart solutions to things, and very quick to pick up trends, have caught up to America in the digital innovation after being behind for so long. Now they're right up sort of level in terms of skills and corporate innovation and things like that. So much so that American companies are backing startups in Britain now and so forth. So and that wasn't the case before. It is now. So Britain, of course, is very strong in human capital. But where are all the innovators going? They're leaving. They're all over the world, just like all the smart Irish entrepreneurs are everywhere but Ireland. And you see the same in other European countries. You meet Frenchmen in China. You meet Italians in Southeast Asia. And these are all the movers and the shakers, because they can't make any money back in Europe. There's something wrong with the system. If the brain drain is happening today in 2025, how do you reverse the brain drain?
Why is the reason they don't do an about turn? Because there'll be this period of strife in between. Say you wanted to adopt some free market principles, which would result in more money for literally everyone, including the government. Okay. Is the reason they don't, and they just carry on down this stupendous route of we need to tax people more to make money.
Yeah.
Like we need to do higher rates of tax, not lower rates of tax, right? Is the reason they do that because if they changed, there would be this period of a number of years where they were taxing lower and there weren't, and the whole process hadn't kind of get kicked off. So they have to sort of weather this bit of the storm,
See, so, when someone like Trump goes and he knows when he spoke to the, what he called the business community and Carl Icahn and all these billionaires, and he goes, what do you guys want? What do you need? Okay, this is the tax breaks we're going to do for the rich. Of course, the rich bring their money back and then it's being invested in America. And that's generally a good plan in America to work to some success. The British government would have to kind of do the same. It's got to identify people who are overseas and talk to them and say, what would you be looking for to bring your operations back home and to have residents back in there instead of being wherever else you are. And you really need to understand that and then take that leap of faith. But this goes back to the thing that we were saying before, is people in mainstream politics don't want to do any work or take any risks in that department. They think they have the tools and they're just using the same tools as before. And City of London doesn't mind so much because they're, in financialized instruments that they're running and have giant portfotfolios. But we're talking about people in SMEs, small to medium-sized businesses who could become large businesses one day. And, we're talking about the street, and the city. These are two different things. And so where's the priority with the government? It's with the city. It's not with the SME sector. It's not with the entrepreneur, the startup sector. It's not really about growth, because how many people in Parliament know anything about, starting a successful tech startup? There's only a few, and most of them have been kicked out of Parliament already. All the smart guys,
We better stop ranting. It's true. It's all true. It's all true. And even the grand conspiracy is true. It's just it's a bit more nuanced, would you say? But
definitely.
But if you can zoom out far enough from this planet, you'll not only realize it's round, but you will realize that there's a geopolitical system happening. Why, is there a
No.
You
got to be
flat
careful.
earthers in here.
No.
But if you could, you would see that the geopolitical moves are a form of conspiracy, because power is conspiring to do things. And because I think it's very hard. The conspiracy thing is hard to ignore, because it kind of does seem to be true, but it's just not. It's just been given a bad word, a bad. It's taken in a bad light.
It is. But how does that affect me on the ground in my world? Not so much. I mean, it's good to know. I mean, if you really want to zoom out, there's no borders from space, and we're just playing some funny games with each other down here, and making life hard for ourselves most of the time. And but I think there's a certain amount of bandwidth you can give to ruminating on the grand conspiracy. But at the end of the day, that if you spend too much time doing that, I think you still have to deal with real politic and the ebb and flow of day-to-day politics. I vote because I want to at least have a minimal amount of skin in the game so that I can criticize or I can argue. So that's why I vote for instance, in the U.S. elections, because otherwise I'm saying I'm criticizing the president. Well, did you vote? Yeah, I did. If I didn't, I'd just be some, whatever. So, I mean, it's not that my vote particularly is going to swing any election, but that's the main reason, because I want to have skin in the game in the discussion. Otherwise, what am I saying? Who am I talking to? What sort of values am I representing? Freedom and representative democracy, which we are questioning today. But
I was going to say, yeah. But I thought we'd just taken that one apart.
Yeah, we did. But I'm digressing a little bit, but yeah, I think we've covered a lot of interesting topics today, and I think and where the intersections are on some of these things. Yeah,
no, but it's important.
Yeah.
It's important because I think we were talking about it earlier, that there's a temptation to adopt a sort of a theory that's an anti-everything theory. It's all fucking bullshit. It's all a conspiracy. It's all because it does look like that in many senses. And I think the way you've described it now, it kind of does show that there's a truth in that.
Yeah.
But then you don't need to necessarily, dissolve into it and let it take you down, because it doesn't need to take you down. This is stuff. This is human nature. This is human action. Yeah. This is what it is. This is human action. These are hierarchies that are all working together and
networks.
Stuff. Yeah.
And we're part of it. We're part of it. We build our own networks. And again, back to, if you want to end on a positive note, any civilization that's hit the wall, any empire that's hit the wall, there's always been break-off civilizations out of that falling empire, out of that collapsing civilization. Always break-off civilizations or parallel civilizations, and it's always been the case. So that has happened in every single instance in history. Every single instance is, and that's going to happen here. In fact, this is what this event is, and this is what other events are, and these other communities and Bitcoin community and so forth is kind of a breakaway civilization off the old order in a way. It's a fight. You got to fight. You got to fight to keep it independent, keep it decentralized. Because they're gonna fight to centralize it. No doubt. Expect it.
Freedom is not granted.
100%.
Well, look, Patrick, thanks, mate. I really appreciate this. I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure I will remember everything you just told me, but it's helped me to think about things in a much more coherent way. That's assuming it's all true, of course. I'm not doubting that you're not being truthful. But many thanks for speaking, and I would love to do this another time sometime. I didn't. Yeah. I'm glad to have met you. You're a fellow Brit. Well, you're a limey. and you don't live too far away. So I'd definitely like to do this again sometime when things are moving on.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah, anytime.
Thank you.